Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way is in Training. This is a podcast exploring how warriors should train and fight, as well as how they should live. We will talk about technique, but we'll also dive deep into fitness, mindset, and strategy. We will explore leadership and philosophy as well. So whether you are a young soldier, a veteran police officer, a responsible armed citizen, or simply someone looking for an authentic life, let's examine how the lessons of combat and preparation for it can help us fulfill our potential. Let's explore the way together and learn how the discipline of training can show us our true selves amidst the chaos of life. Hey everybody, in this episode I've got Bryan Eastridge of American Fighting Revolver. And this is going to be something that's a little bit out of my normal lane because I'm not really a revolver guy, but we're going to have a deep in the weeds conversation about training and how it applies to the classic wheel gun. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, Bryan?
Well, let's see. I guess you could start. I did about 4 years in the Army, actually about 5 as the 82nd. I was paratrooper for a bit right before GWOT kicked off, and I got out in early 2002, became a cop in Oklahoma City. And Oklahoma City was pretty deeply rooted in revolver training. And I got into shooting police pistol competitions, PPC, which if you've ever watched one of those, it's second only in boredom to like a bullseye match. So it's
when I first got on Chicago, the like lead firearms instructors all had like really strong PPC backgrounds. So not my cup of tea, but still there's some pretty impressive shooting there.
Yeah, it's real heavily accuracy based. And that was kind of where I really grew into like working on revolvers quite a bit. And I actually went to school and learned how to build 1911s. So, transferring that knowledge wasn't that big of a departure. And I had a bunch of range staff that were like the old Smith factory armor course trained people. So had a lot of good mentors there. And let's see, I did just shy of 21 years as a cop. And then Daryl Bulkey and I started working together and doing consulting gigs and training gigs. And I was like, I think my job's getting in the way of my career here, So and we both had a real deep love of revolvers. And first time he came to Oklahoma City, he stayed with me for a couple of days on another gig. And I was actually like had a revolver torn down and was working on it. He's like, you know how to do that? I said, yeah. He goes, like, you're under 60, bro. Like nobody knows how to do that stuff anymore. So I tuned up a couple of his guns and my one big accolade was I was an NRA I am an NRA distinguished revolver shooter, which I didn't know was a big deal until I met Daryl. So he saw my distinguished badge and he goes, "Oh my gosh, you're a distinguished shooter?" I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "They didn't make a big deal out of that on your PD?" And I was like, "Yeah, they told me there was remedial shooters out there and to take a cup of coffee and a rain jacket, like they didn't make a big production out of it or anything." So that was kind of cool, but that's kind of how it all kicked off with American Fighting Revolver.
Yeah. And so first off, I'm going to give you smack about the revolvers because I always do. I'm good friends with Caleb Giddings, and I'm always telling him that the revolvers belong in a museum next to the blunderbusses and black powder muskets. But having said that, like if you look on the wall behind me, I spent significant hours of my life learning to use fighting tools that nobody uses anymore. So I really have no leg to stand on except, the friendly,
Banter.
Busting each other's. Yeah. And I love watching a revolver run really well. Like watching like a USPSA revolver GM shoot a stage there's something just really cool about the art form of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they definitely still have their own like
I was talking with Chuck Haggard about this over the weekend. I was training with Chuck, and like there was a significant amount of time when I was like buying dope in the housing projects in Chicago, when I carried a 5-shot snub with an internal hammer in my pocket. I mean, they still have their applications for sure.
Well, I'll quote Daryl. He said, they're a lot like a 12 gauge shotgun. They're a real niche weapon, or they're a real niche for everybody. Like they supplement a lot of, like a high level practitioner of violence. It's a good supplement to your loadout, right? On an ankle, a pocket, a jacket pocket, something like that, that maybe it's not the best thing, but it's better. To me, it serves a little better than maybe a small semi-auto. So, and then for the bulk of the concealed carry populace, it really, simple manual of arms, simple to operate. Let's face it, the bulk of our gun owning populace doesn't shoot more than, a box of ammo in 5 years or something. So I think they did a pretty good role there.
There's a video like making the rounds on the internet right now. Some guy even older than me that they try to carjack him. I think it's in a foreign country. I'm not sure. I don't think it's in the U.S. Have you seen it? The one I'm talking about?
He goes to torching off full magnums too.
Oh, and he lays waste to those two carjackers. Like they're done. And I mean, it's definitely still viable.
Well, and I feel, there's pros and cons to everything. There's give and take to everything. And one of the things, especially now that we got like good body camera footage and stuff like that going around with cops, and I'm not saying this is just for cops, but one of the real benefits is when you shoot a revolver in time and space that is not your optimal grips and stance, they don't care. The gun is completely driven by your finger. And ammunition driven guns, semi-autos, tend to like to have resistance on the backside. So I find like in the training world, we spend a lot of time developing shooters' grip to really maximize driving the gun. And the revolver doesn't care. It doesn't care what the orientation is.
That was another interesting, I really enjoyed, and I've known Chuck for a while. I know you know Chuck too, and he's a great guy. He's very knowledgeable, right? And he brought up a really good point, and this doesn't so much apply to the people that go down the rabbit hole with semi-autos, right? It doesn't apply to people like Les or me or,
Right.
But how many times do you see on dash cam and body cam video, the officer who doesn't practice getting malfunction after malfunction? And it's shooter induced. It's absolutely shooter induced. So yeah, for someone who's going to be a defensive carrier, but not necessarily a high level practitioner, I think that's a really viable point that honestly, I hadn't really thought that much of before Chuck's class, because I tend to be a little solipsistic about this stuff. I'm like, well, train more.
Yeah.
But that's not always the answer for everybody. And it would be arrogance of the highest order of me to think that I should be elitist about the right to defend yourself.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I went through a phase with that where I was like, if you're not starting with a Glock 19, you're just wrong. Like, just start there and go from there. And then I met Caleb, right about the time that he went to work for Taurus, and we went and did a consulting gig with him and some other people at the factory. And I started realizing like the sheer volume of revolvers that Taurus sells and the sheer lack of number of those I ever saw in a training class. And I went, well, apparently I'm speaking to, like when I go and do an open enrollment or get hired to train at a conference, we're speaking to such a thin margin of the overall demographic of gun buyers and armed citizens, or, armed people. We like to think of ourselves as armed professionals, right? We have a really deep professional knowledge of the subject and have done, work involving firearms. The bulk of the populace of the United States, that's not their thing. It's, to them, it's like a fire extinguisher, right? And that's a Daryl Bulkyism is, a revolver makes a great fire extinguisher.
Like, here's kind of my thought on that, right? Like, I mean, do I absolutely believe that you should train to a significant degree if you're going to carry a gun? Of course I do. But do I think that the right to carry a gun should be restricted to those who feel like me? No, I do not. Absolutely don't. Right. And an analogy I always liked about this is gun people are like car people. Right. You've got three groups of car people. You've got the people that don't really care as long as it gets them where they're going to go. You've got the people that have the really nice cars in the garage they take out, one Sunday a month to drive around with the car club, but they don't drive it fast. They don't ever push it, right? And then you've got the people that go to the drag strip, right? We're the people that go to the drag strip. It's a very, very small percentage. Most people actually fall into it's just a utilitarian tool.
Mm-hmm.
The large group of car owners, it's just a utilitarian tool. And that's okay. Now, I think we should try to express upon them the need to train a little bit more and be a little more conversant and understand a bit more. But I'm also, the older I get, the more and more of a Second Amendment absolutist I get. Like, the more and more, just like it should be available to pretty much everybody. If you're not a serial killer, you should be able to carry a gun, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not up to me to be the arbiter of what is okay to carry a gun or not. That's not my role. That's not my place. That's not my right. I don't have the right to tell somebody else that.
Yeah. And, I feel like, my experience in the training world, a lot of it got to be very exclusive. And I'm not gonna throw people under the bus or anything, but I saw where, there was almost an elitist attitude with some of the open enrollment stuff going on. Well, if you're not doing this, or your flashlight doesn't have X number of candela. And when I started working the Guardian conference where we met with, the concealed carry guys, I saw a demographic of the shooting populace that I'd never interacted with before. Because typically when people would seek me out to go to do training or whatever, it was pretty specific. Like, I want to get better at XYZ. And then I started seeing these people showing up with guns that guys like you and I would go, what in the heck are you, like, you're already messed up. Like, you're already starting behind the curve. And then, I had this real paradigm shift in the way I looked at it. And I was like, these people look like my mom, my dad, my siblings that really don't care much about the gun piece. They just want to get better with what they got. And it really made me take a step back and go, have I been a little elitist towards people that are willing to spend money and actually come out and train versus, encouraging or trying to build that community is hey, all right, your first gun, you bought a Taurus 650 CIA and you don't know a thing about it. Was it my job to poo-poo you and say, well, here's a Glock, just take my loaner Glock and we'll train you on that? When the reality is maybe they're never ever going to purchase one of those, or maybe they live in a state where it's not, kosher for them to have a 15-round magazine or whatever. So I was like, maybe we should just focus on making these people proficient with what they have. And it really it was pretty staggering. Year before last, Chuck Haggard and I had a bunch of of our carrier revolvers. And
right.
we just did 2 hours of tactical improv I called it 45 minutes of training crammed into 2 hours. And we had like this overwhelming number of students that were showing up going, oh yeah, I've got a LCR 38. That's what I carry every day. I'm like, oh, well, what are you carrying out here? Well, I just thought it was best that I'd buy this, Wonder Blaster to come train with. And I'm like, but you carry an LCR 38 every day. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Why do you do that? Well, the state I live in doesn't like, I got to have 10-round magazines. So, and they make ammo restrictions and all this stuff. So if I carry a revolver, it's like I'm okay, and that was a pretty shining example of like, oh man, maybe I've been steering some people the wrong direction a little bit.
And I will say that I think flipping it back a little bit, right, to the people that are more serious about training, like I've always thought that you should basically have a carry gun, and if you train with something different, it should be basically a larger version of the same gun.
Yeah.
Because that way you're doing the same. It's easier to shoot the bigger gun. It's easy to learn to get better with the bigger gun. You'll get more skill quicker than will apply to the smaller gun, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Plus, smaller guns are just not as much fun to shoot as bigger guns.
No, and really, even with all the cool polymer striker fired guns out there right now, and I think we're in this golden age of them, right? Taurus is making a really affordable polymer striker fired gun that's just excellent at a price point that like normal earth people can afford, right?
Yeah.
Who would have ever, like, I would have never thought that I could go bench a Gen 5 Glock and shoot, 1.5 inches at 25 yards. I mean, that was like 1911 territory back, 20 years ago. And I'm like, man, we're in this golden polymer era. And and I was with you, but like, I started looking at the smaller these guns got and the more convenient these semi-autos got, the more challenges we had and the less reliability we had with them.
Oh yeah. Well, like look at so we'll go back to the 1911 design, right? You just mentioned, because I just love them. I love
Me too. That's my heart, man.
John Moses Browning was a genius. But like there's a real size limit on a reliable 1911. Like they're small size limit. Like you can't get them below a certain size without drastically modifying them and have them still work. They just don't work.
Yeah, or they kind of work.
Yeah, well, to me, that's not working.
Yeah,
it's not working.
And we're in a magic heyday with the 1911, 2011 as well, as far as, you have good, accurate, reliable guns across all the price points now. Yeah. Whereas, the olden days that weren't that long ago, if it didn't start at $1,000, you were kind of wasting your time, or you were going to spend the rest. If you bought a $600 1911, the other $400 was going to the gunsmith to keep it running.
Yeah.
And now, man, you can buy some fantastic off the rack guns that are very affordable. So to me, where the revolver fits in all of that is when we shrink that package down to a convenient carry gun, the reliability factor kind of goes like it gets compromised on the semi-auto side, whereas on the revolver side with it, all the mechanics of the gun are literally driven with your trigger finger. So if you bodge a draw, you bodge your grip, you're shooting it from some weird, laying on your back upside down with your wrist not locked. It doesn't matter. As long as the cylinder turns and the hammer falls, pretty good chance the ammunition in the gun is going to fire.
And I carried one as my backup for years. I carried it on my ankle. I carried it appendix inside my waistband underneath my duty gear.
Yeah.
Right. So it was like kind of tucked away underneath the duty belt. Carried it in my pocket when I was buying dope. I mean, I got a funny ankle holster story to tell you. So I was working with a guy when I was brand new on the job that wasn't my regular partner, right? And we were in the car, and like my ankle holster was kind of itchy, so like I hiked up my pants, like scratched on the ankle holster. It goes, "Oh man, that's pretty cool. I need to get one of those." I'm not going to say the guy's name because I don't want to embarrass him. So he wasn't my regular partner, right? And like a month or two later, I worked with him again. He's like, "Hey, look, I got one." But he got like the cheapest Uncle Mike ankle holster possible. And we get in a foot chase, right? And we're running down the sidewalk in the middle of the night, and we're chasing this guy. And I swear to God, the guy I'm working with, his revolver flies out of that ankle holster and goes sailing right over the shoulder of the guy we're chasing and lands on the sidewalk and skitters to a stop. The guy drops to his knees and raises his hands and goes, "Don't kill me. Don't kill me."
I saw that. I saw that very scenario play out with a Glock 26. Like almost it just our foot chase, it skidded between the guy's legs as he was running, and he fell face first on the pavement. Goes, "Don't shoot, don't shoot." And yeah, there's something to be said about quality gear. I carried a 340 SC in a Renegade ankle holster for a lot of years, and the only like faux pas I had with it, I stepped off in a flower bed because I'm just checking a loud alarm on a house, and they left their water running, and it like the outdoor faucet, and I step off in the flower bed, and that sucker is mud for about 2 feet, and I bury it up to my left knee, and I end up having to dig through the mud, because it peeled my ankle rig off in the mud. And so I turn the hose off and go find the end of it, and then I'm sitting in the backyard washing my revolver out when the homeowner comes out and goes, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Oh dear. Yeah, I'm good." But and then I carried one in a pocket for a while. I carried, for most of my career, I had a revolver on my person somewhere, and till I went to bike patrol, it got real inconvenient when I was in bike patrol to have an ankle gun, or so I generally I'd carry like an LCP or something in a shirt pocket just as a spare. But yeah, it fits a lot of things well that the small semi-autos don't do so good at. And even large semi-autos, you fire them inside of a car where you're not locked in behind them, and you can really have some odd stoppages. And especially like you mentioned, like the bulk of the police officers I know, the range was a once, twice a year thing. And, you watch video after video of these guys flubbing a draw and getting one round out of the gun before they're doing immediate action on the gun. And a lot of them are making problems worse because they've never rehearsed that either. And the tap rack just turns into tap, make it worse, tap, make it worse, tap. And I've seen, how like even the design of some guns can be a hindrance under stress. Having the cool extended mag release when you get under, when the brown stuff hits the fan and it's your first at bat and you eject a magazine on the ground, I've seen stuff like that over and over and over again. And I would never advocate like, hey, we need to take modern American law enforcement and put them back in revolvers. I think that's ludicrous. But there's certainly some benefits for people that aren't quite as polished in training, if that makes sense, right?
So let's segue then. Let's talk about training with the revolver. Like just give me your thoughts on that, since you're the SME here and I am definitely not.
Well, the first thing I would say is selecting a revolver now has never been easier. And I say that because, and I am pretty brand agnostic. I mean, I've got Taurus, Ruger, Colt, Smith. I mean, there's one of everything back here. But knowing that you do not have to shoot the ammunition marked +P is the first step. Knowing is half the battle. Knowing that you don't need full tilt ammo, and just because it says 357 on the side, like this 650 CIA is perfectly capable of shooting 357. It makes an exceptional 38. And and I say that, you and I get a kick out of that, but the bulk of the first time gun buyers that go into a gun shop, oh, well, you need this +P, this defensive ammo. And it's like, no, you really don't. I would be hard pressed to say that the bulk of humanity that has a fire extinguisher type gun in their house would be just suited with 148 grain wad cutters target ammo, because that barrel ain't going to generate +P velocity as it is. It's just going to hurt. So
and wad cutters, actually, like, we did some ballistic testing in Chuck's class, and
pretty eye-opening.
Wad cutters do a pretty good job. I think there's a reason why guys like Jelly Bryce liked wad cutters. Yeah,
and the Keith style semi wads, NYPD put a lot of dudes in the dirt with a lead semi wad cutter, and even lead round nose. But there's no need to go buy the full tilt ammo. Lipsy shipped me the new Smith & Wesson Mountain Gun 44, and that makes an excellent 44 special. And the first time I touched off a Magnum in it, I was like, the bulk of humanity that's going to buy this, the first time they shoot a Magnum is probably going to put it away. Whereas, those of us in the know that 1,000 feet, 800 to 1,000 feet per second out of a 4-inch barrel is plenty. Like that's plenty.
Yeah.
So
and even for civilians, like Chuck made me think of something that I really honestly wasn't even on my radar, because I'm just so used to duty loads.
Yeah.
Like everything's a duty load, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or a duty caliber at least.
Right.
And he had those little, 22 revolvers, and those things, it's a small hole, but it penetrates as far as the 9mm and the 38 and all that. It's sure a lot easier to shoot and carries more ammo.
Yeah.
I don't think it's what I would pick, but for a grandma, that might not be a bad option.
Yeah. I have this thing, I call it the my mom factor. Like, my mom is not a gun person at all. She owns a couple. She actually went and did a concealed carry course. I was like proud of her. And I asked her what she went through it with, and she goes, "Oh, I shot a 22. I said, "Really?" And I'm looking at the target picture she's posted, and I'm like, "Which 22? And she goes, "Oh, that Beretta that you loaned," or I ended up in a trade with my brother-in-law and traded him in my first Beretta 92. And I'm like, "The Beretta 92? And she goes, "Yeah." And I was like, "That's a 9mm, Mom." Oh, okay. Well, I thought it was an awful lot for a 22, but somehow she equated it to that, which is fine. It's just, there was a serious lack of education and even really interest in the gun. She just wanted to go do it to do it. And I look at that and I go, if I hand my mom, this mountain gun, and I stoke it with 240 grain jacketed hollow points at 1,300 feet per second, she's probably never going to pick up a gun again. So, get educated. Like, my first thing with training on a revolver would be like, get educated on like the caliber a little bit, and some of the ammunition. Try to look into that a little bit. The 22s, like Chuck's a big fan of the LCR 22.
Yeah.
And we both got like LCR 22s and the 43C Smith & Wesson 22s. The pros in them, 8 shots and 22 long rifle it's a kind of a joke to shoot, right? It's more fun than it is anything else. With the right ammunition, it's capable, but the trade-off is rimfire. The trigger has to be very heavy to ignite that rimfire round. So that's where we enter into 32 H&R Magnum, which is rimfire like recoil with a center fire trigger.
Right.
So, and I'm not as big on the 32s as like Chuck and Daryl and some of the other guys, mainly because it's one more caliber and I've got tons of other calibers and I just don't want to add another one. But I think it's probably the best innovation that I've seen in the revolver space in a long time. Is, you know, you can get the small J-frame size gun, like, and you get 20% more ammo and a caliber that recoils about 60% of what a 38 does. So am I going to go like patrol the streets of America with it? Probably not. But is it a viable option for a backup gun or a fire extinguisher gun or even like a concealed carry gun that, you know, maybe I just want to go walk my dog? Like,
yeah, the go to buy milk gun.
Yeah, the go to the grocery store gun. Our mutual friend Les and I were talking, and he's like, you know, it's funny. I listened to you guys talk about all this J-frame stuff, and I realized I'm at the gym with a J-frame in my pocket. Maybe there's something to this. Like,
well, Robert Vogel carries a J-frame.
Yeah, it's
probably, you know, one of the best semi-automatic pistol shooters ever produced.
Yeah,
it's.
I am probably 90.
It's like that classic cliche, right? The first rule of a gunfight is to have a gun.
Yeah, 100%. And I spend 90% of my time working from home now and running our website and doing tech support and all the non-glamorous stuff that goes on behind, you know, having a company. And 90% of the time I've got a Smith & Wesson 43C in my pocket. So 22, 8-shot 22. Now I've got other guns in the house, but you know, sometimes I just want to like go outside and get the mail and I don't feel like, well, okay, I need to put my duty belt on and let me get my XYZ or whatever. And the rest of the time, if I've got that, I've always got a 38 in my pocket. Like if I leave the house, there's a J-frame in my pocket. And depending on kind of the threat posture or whatever you want to call it, the holidays, I've always got a semi-auto on somewhere, like G45 and a spare mag supplemented with a J-frame. Because you and I both know what happens the 3-4 weeks that lead up to Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
They all got to make the money for the Xbox. So I'm going to knock over a convenience store. Right. So, so I always have a semi-auto on when I leave the house. But the rest of the time, if there's not some, you know, I'm not going to a shopping mall. I'm just going to lunch at, got a couple little mom and pop restaurants here where I live. And it's like, I'm just going to go sit down and have lunch. I got a couple of J-frames on, you know, and I think like you and I having a pretty extensive law enforcement background, the one edge I see that gives over the just average gun owner is you can really read the room quickly because you've seen the movie enough times to know that doesn't look right. That's out of place and something bad's about to happen.
Well, something interesting that Les and I were talking about earlier that ties into this is there's not enough of that for civilian carriers. There's not enough training in that for civilian carriers.
Yeah.
And the institutional training that LE gets is not perfect by any means. Right? It's very flawed. There's always room for improvement. But there's still just a volume of scenario-based training and decision making, right?
Yeah.
And there needs to be more of that in the civilian space. There really does. Because like our conversation earlier was all about, you know, the benefits of competition for the real world, but also the limitations of relying solely upon competition for the real world. Right?
Yeah.
And there's always been that argument between the tactical side of the house that talks about awareness and mindset over the hard skills and the competition side of the house that talks about hard skills over all else. But the problem is they're both right and they're both wrong. You
100%.
need both. You absolutely need both. 100, they're both equally as important, and each camp neglects the other, right? And like, there's not enough decision based training. There's not enough scenario based training, and there's not enough force on force for civilians because it's still a fight.
Yeah.
And you've got to learn to capture the opponent's timing, to manipulate their timing, to use it to your advantage, to seize the initiative. And you don't get any of that by learning to go fast with a gun. Now, you need to be able to go fast with a gun to exploit that. I'm not diminishing those benefits, but it's not the whole thing. And
It's not the big picture.
I think people misunderstand that.
Well,
back to revolvers though.
But
the double action.
Go ahead.
On that,
Les and I, we had a conversation after he'd been a cop for about, 3 weeks. And I said, he's like, yeah, we're going to do some force on force training. And I said, whether you realize it or not, every single call you go on, every time you interact with a person in law enforcement is a force on force scenario. They don't always end up being a fight. They don't always end up being a gunfight or, an arrest. But every single time you encounter another person, that is a force on force scenario. And he was like, man, I hadn't thought about that. And I went, I hadn't either until you had this conversation with me. Yeah. But people skills is one of the things that I think that modern law enforcement completely leaves out.
Yes.
I mean, how many times did you talk a person into handcuffs versus like physically have to restrain them?
Well, and not only that, but if you can't talk to people, you are useless as anything but an on-view officer. You will never be able to run an investigation. You should be able to arrest someone, have to fight them, have to go get them patched up, and then be able to talk to them in the interview room and get them to tell you who they bought from.
Right.
You should be able to. Like, if you can't do that, you're not valuable as a cop. You've got to be able to learn to do that.
I had many times, this was my move during the summer. So I would carry one of those little igloo ice chests full of bottled water, and I would catch like average Joe citizen out mowing their yard. And I worked in the hood. So here's average Joe that actually takes care of their property. And I'd pull up and just start a conversation and go, man, you look hot. Here, you want a bottle of water? And would get more information out of that than, hi, my name's Officer so-and-so. Have you seen any illegal activity? Any of that crap. And it's like, just be a human, like a normal human, have some verbal skills. And one, with violent suspects, you can avoid a lot of injury and everything else just from like being able to talk them off the ledge. But I see that like force on force scenarios, in the like training world, like a lot of times they digress into like gunfight fantasy camp or, and it's like, man, so finding good quality force on force is really, you really got to seek that out and really put the background and deep dive in on it. And they're not all created equal and, and all those things, but.
Well, and like I used to do two different like kinds of force on force, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got the realistic decision-making stuff. And then I had stuff that was designed to be kind of sparring for gunfighters.
Yeah.
So it's not fantasy camp. It's not like a scenario like the other force on force, but it's invaluable for giving you that experience because, it's usually 3 to 5 rounds, 3 to 5 yards, 3 to 5 seconds until it's not.
Yeah.
And when it's not, sometimes it becomes running through the backyards, throwing shots at each other for a block and a half.
Right.
And learning to develop all of those skills to be a well-rounded fighter with a handgun. That's where that helps you out.
Yeah.
The blazing away hard skills, that's the 3 to 5 yards, 3 to 5 seconds, 3 to 5 rounds, without a doubt. Then it's draw speed, trigger speed, it's all that stuff, right? Until it's not. And then when it's not, you better be able to capture the initiative and understand the timing and use it to your advantage.
Yeah. Which, the reality is that the bulk of our gun owning concealed carriers, they don't have any obligation to chase people through backyards and get into extended gunfights either. So,
true. But it could be an extended gunfight in your house.
There you go. And 100%. So with revolvers, back to tying that into revolvers. So let's just say the scenario is burglar, and I have the fire extinguisher gun. I've got my Taurus 856, right? Or, my Smith J-frame bodyguard, or K-frame that was my dad's police gun 30 years ago, and it's on the nightstand. If that's what you got to fight with, is it bad? Is it, we could get into weapon mounted lights and handheld flashlights and all those things. However, if what you have, and that is what I'm seeing, the bulk of humanity in the gun buying populace is like, oh yeah, I got one of those Taurus revolvers. It's my nightstand gun. It's like, well, you might want to learn to fight with that thing. And you might, but there again,
here's something people don't do in their house that I do in mine, and like I always tell people they should do. Like, we put night lights in the house, right? Not in our bedroom. Our bedroom is pitch black.
Yeah.
We've got just enough ambient light in the avenues of approach if people are coming in, that they'll be lit up to us because we're night adapted with our vision when we wake up.
Right.
So you don't need a weapon mounted light at that point.
No.
Except maybe PID, but I think I can PID somebody that's not related to me coming into my house.
Yeah, and I've got, 2 teenage stepdaughters. So sometimes a bump in the night is somebody getting up to get a glass of water or something, So but everything but my bedroom is pretty well lit out there. And, I tell a lot of people, but buy a good flashlight. And have a decent gun and a good flashlight. Like, that's,
well, you can get a flashlight at Home Depot now for $15 that
I know it.
You would spend $600 on with Surefire 10 years ago.
I know it. It's glorious. We're in a heyday. But I'm like working in the revolver space. The number of people I know that come out and train and then don't carry the guns they train with. And then they go, well, yeah, I got a revolver on the nightstand, or it's my, I throw that in my pocket when I'm, especially, it's really funny. I do a gig in Texas every year, and we got people that are urban and we got people that are like rural ranchers. And the rural ranchers show up with like, we do a shotgun day, some beat up 870 Wingmaster, that looks like it just been drugged down the path, and they can shoot it. They can run it. And then you get the urban guy that's like, well, I bought a, 80 whatever tactical, this, that, and the other with a light, and I'm spending 90% of my time like, okay, this is how you operate that. And then with revolvers, it's like, it's the same thing. Like, I had a guy show up to revolver class with, some ancient like highway patrolman, and could run that gun like lights out. And then had another dude that's like, he's like, well, I got into this so I could shoot ICOR. I'm like, hey, that's noble. And just struggled because he's trying to grip the gun like a semi-auto. He's trying to shoot the gun like a semi-auto. And it's like, there's a big difference there. There's a big leap in the way you operate the gun. And, so the mentality is really kind of different. And there are fewer and fewer people that really understand the nuance of how to run a revolver. So Daryl and I had both worked in the semi-auto space, this, semi-tactical space, I guess you could say, with different stuff. And both of us were kind of like, that's not me anymore. Like, I'm not riding on helicopters or jumping out of planes and running nods or any of that stuff anymore. Like, I just want to go to Home Depot, right? Like I got to paint my backdrop. I don't want to have to put on 3 layers of stuff to go to a place where it's probably a bunch of dudes like me, right? I just don't want to get robbed getting out of my truck or getting into it. So, the revolver fits that space pretty well. But if I have to fight with it, I don't feel outgunned with it. And that's the hurdle for a lot of people with the capacity and things like that. That's like, oh man, if I got into a fight with that, and it's like, well, if you practice loading the thing, you get pretty good at loading it under stress and under time. Are you really that outgunned, or is it like we've been trained through the movies and TV that, well, my gunfight's going to look like this, and I have to have all the tools to do that? And it's like, the harsh reality is most of the people that I interact with now in the revolver space are more worried about a hands-on robbery than anything else. Or if they're a woman, a sexual assault.
Right.
Like, I can't like hands-on rob you from across the parking lot. Hey, give me your wallet. Like, okay, I'm just going to leave. Right. There are always the outliers, there's the mall shootings and things like that. But the bulk of the human populace, I feel like, that carries a gun is more worried about somebody coming up and trying to carjack them or physically assault them. And semi-autos in entanglements, that is its own sector of training, right? How to keep the gun running when you're in a physical altercation, right? I mean, there are trainers that literally that's their subject matter, and God bless them. That's a noble endeavor, because I feel like that's the reality for most of our, armed populace. And a revolver works really, really good in confined spaces with
at arm's length,
arm's length, and no moving mass, and no, I don't have to account for, is the slide going to hit me in the chest, or am I going to push the muzzle into this thing too hard and take it out of battery? And I go, with a revolver, if you press the muzzle into the threat, you get the bonus round of all the extra expanding gases. Like it's a positive as opposed to something we got to train around. Right.
And I think too, that kind of ties back into what we were saying earlier about, it's so easy to be kind of elitist about training, right? But the grandma effect, right?
Yeah.
If somebody purse snatches grandma, they grab her, they're going to beat her up, and she can get that revolver, that 22 revolver out, because that's lethal force to grandma.
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely viable. Segue bit. I want to ask you about trigger pull. Double action trigger pull on a revolver. So it was really interesting in the class with Chuck, because he said the same thing I say in my class about trigger pull using different language. It's always interesting to me how I see so many parallels, just the words are different because we all come up with our own words.
Yeah.
Right? But I have 3 trigger presses I use in a semi-auto. I've got slapping it, I've got prep and press, the classic, very accurate shot. And then I have what I call a rolling break, where I'm aware of the break, but I'm rolling smoothly through it. So it's not a slap and it's not a prep, right? And I forget which words Chuck used for it, but it was the same 3 concepts. And he was talking about how the double action only trigger pull on a revolver was the best way he ever found to train people for that rolling break. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, 100%. And I'd always kind of trained prep and press with a double action or, striker fired gun. The G45 is like my jam. It's because it's like the polymer striker fired Colt Commander. So with a few more BBs, right? But I've shot revolvers so long. I was in a class with Justin Dial a while back, and he's like, all right, he calls it, a prep and press, a crash, and a roll. So roll it, crash it, or prep it. And, a crash was like you're describing a slap, right?
Right.
And I roll a double. If I try to prep and press a Glock, I'll screw it up. But if I roll it, I shoot it just like a double action revolver. And it's funny. He walks over and he goes, "Man, you roll the trigger like a demon. I've never seen somebody do that at like 15 yards and shoot that, like hold that accuracy standard." I'm like, man, it's like I have probably 500,000 38 wad cutters down a Smith K-frame. So it's kind of a thing. It's just anchored in. It's hardwired now. But with a revolver, you can actually crash a trigger in close. May not be pretty, but I mean, you can hammer through one, which if your grip is good, you can hammer through it. For the bulk of us, we want to roll the trigger. And if you're rolling it, your grip is not nearly as critical as it is if you're trying to like crash it or slap it, right? Which Justin, and I'll quote him on this too. He said something really sage. He goes, you can pick up these Taurus 856, like 856 ultralight for like under $400. Like you can catch them on sale for like $300. He's like, if you invest the $300 in that and you do nothing but dry practice with it, just unloaded gun and roll the trigger. He goes, you've gotten your money out of that tenfold. And I went,
oh yeah,
man, I didn't even think of that. Like he goes, they're typically heavy. It takes you a little while to get kind of the mastery of it. But once you do that, you go to any other platform and it's like, oh, this is easy. I actually, when I was shooting Berettas and things and staccatos and things like that, I would actually increase the trigger weight on them because I was, rolling a trigger and I would like overdrive the triggers on them. So, people would pick up my staccato P and they'd be like, God, what is that, like 6? And I'd go, no, I got it set at 5.5. I actually increased it from the factory weight, just to, just for the way I shoot. And Beretta 92s the same way. Ernest sent me one in a single action. I lit the single action off in recoil one time, and I was like, "Oh, that's like apparently my finger is not tuned into that." So, I typically shoot a pretty healthy trigger pull on revolvers, and that lends itself to shooting all those other platforms pretty well. Even though I don't shoot them nearly as often as I do revolvers now. I mean, I can pick up a Glock or a 1911 or one of those and shoot it at a really high standard of accuracy and precision, just from all that millions of repetitions with a revolver trigger. So
that makes sense. It really does, especially for the striker fire guns,
Mm-hmm.
Because they've kind of got that feel to the trigger anyway, a little bit. It's not quite like a revolver, but it's got that same kind of travel soft feel.
Yeah, it's just roll through the hump, man. Roll right through it. You'll be fine.
So here's a question just for my own personal edification, right? Got nothing to do with the training piece of it per se. What are the 2 most exotic revolvers you own?
Ooh, exotic. Well, I wouldn't even say I have anything all that exotic. I mean, I have I have 2 that are kind of rare. And then I've got, let me look back there. I mean, I've got some like rare collectible pieces back here. One of which, Duluth, Minnesota PD gun from 1939.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It shipped like 3 days before they shut the factory down for wartime production. And it was one of 100 4-inch 3844 heavy duties, which the heavy duty is the old 44 special hand ejector. They bored smaller holes in it and called it a 38 on the 44 frame. So 3844. And that was one of 17 that went to Duluth PD in December of 1939. So it's one of 100, one of 17, and it's number 13, which I thought was kind of cool. So
that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And then other than that, everything else is kind of vanilla, but they're all like like I've got them kind of organized in like engineering changes and like frame sizes and things like that. And it's really interesting to look at the technology upgrades as they went through and started, like even in the 30s and 40s, like let's reduce the amount of like handcraftedness we have to have, serious hands-on labor to make these guns functional and run and all that. And then I've got some old cop guns. I got a gun my dad was in a shooting with, and when I was about 23 days old. So got that one there. And so that I don't like the Chiapas and odd stuff like that. I don't really own anything like that. It's mainly Smith, Colt, Taurus, and Ruger. So
something I really want to do, and I'm not really a collector, right? Like I'm just not, like all my guns are guns to be shot.
Yeah.
The only one I've got that's different is my dad's old 1911. And I've got it in a shadow box in the wall in the living room.
Yeah.
Of course, it's loaded. It's my break glass in case of home invasion gun. But I really want to get a repro set of Wild Bill Hickok's revolvers, just to put on the wall, just to have it's just like a piece of art,
Yeah, and that's doable. I want to say Cimarron or Taylor or somebody makes a 36 cal Navy, still a cap and ball gun. And man,
the beauty about the cap and ball is it's not even an NFA item.
It's not even a firearm.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
I misspoke, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. You can
just order it. You order it in the mail.
Yeah. And it's funny. One of the things Daryl and I do is, we like to deep dive history a lot. And that's a lot of what's on AmericanFightingRevolver.com behind the paywall is these 15, 20-minute videos about, guns of the fighting revolvers of the 20th century. And I've got like 4 cop guns right behind me, and all of them have been through the 70s and 80s, pretty violent times in history, and deep diving, like what modifications did they do? What were the things that they did
the
to
tricks
make
of the trade.
Yeah. And there's some really neat stuff that, in the grips and the way that they would set the guns up, and little modifications. I mean, I've got a Model 66 right over my shoulder here that's got a number 2 pencil eraser behind the trigger, super glued to the frame is an over travel stop, but it's a soft over travel stop. So if you got debris or something in there, you could still press the trigger.
Yeah.
And how they would do action work on these guns to really, the triggers aren't necessarily light, but they're smooth as glass. And, the way they would, set their sights up, and all the way back to guns of like the teens and 20s, old Colt revolvers that Frank Packmeyer modified, and like the guy, Frank Packmeyer.
Yeah.
There's a gun over my shoulder that's got a set of LAPD John Hurst grips on it that, some LAPD officer in the 60s had those grips fitted to his hand for his gun. And we try to explore some of that stuff so that we kind of know where we're at now. And we don't lose a lot of that legacy and lineage of training and the guns, and we preserve some of that history. So,
and I think that's something that's kind of lacking in modern gun culture, especially when like the younger crowd, not so much guys like you and me, but people younger than us. Like Les bought me a copy of McGivern's book, so I've got McGivern's book on my bookshelf.
Yeah.
My dad learned to gunfight from Bill Jordan, so I've got a signed copy of Bill Jordan's No Second Place Winner.
Right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I've got a signed copy of it, signed to my dad, not to me.
Yeah.
Obviously. Right.
It's still cool.
It's
super
cool. Very cool. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not really a revolver guy. The techniques aren't the same as they were then, but I still love looking at them and seeing the principles behind them and how these guys thought, what their thought process was. And how they learn from their experience, and
And the other thing I'm starting to see with, especially doing deep dives into revolvers, is every time we think we invented something new, I can go back in the archives with Jordan or Askins or, McGivern, and I go, oh, this isn't new. He was doing that in 1909 or 1920. It's like,
the principles haven't changed. The equipment has.
Yes.
And the understanding of technique has, but the principles underpinning the techniques haven't changed at all. They haven't changed since we were using bronze swords and sharp sticks.
There's this picture I've got. I have it saved on my phone, and there's two. One is of Jack Weaver, and he's standing in what I would call like a modern boxer stance. And he's got a pre-model 14, like target masterpiece, and he's got the gun in his eye line, and he's standing with his feet, staggered a little bit. His hips are rocked forward, and I'm like, you don't see the bent elbow and all this other craziness. And I show that picture in almost every class when I'm talking about like shooting stances. I'll go, anybody seen this picture? No. I'm like, okay, that's Jack Weaver. Does that look
doing the actual Weaver stance, not what it became? Yeah.
Yeah. And I said, does that look like most of us shoot now? And they're like, oh, yeah. Well, we were told that was bad or that was it. And I'm like, nah, it's been completely twisted out of context for so many years. And a lot of that happened when soft body armor came along that wasn't very soft, and we couldn't get our arms straight in front of us. We had to blade and things like that. And then B8 repair centers, for the last 10 or 12 years, that's kind of been the thing, right? It was Ken Hackathorn and Larry Vickers and guys like that were starting to introduce the B8 repair center 15 years ago or so. And then it just caught fire. And I have a picture of Charles Askins from, I think, 1929, where he's got the Border Patrol shooting on B8 repair centers on their Colt Monitor target. And he's got those repair centers stapled high center chest, and they're shooting at like 3 yards in a combative one-handed stance. And I go, that guy probably knew a thing or two about where to shoot people. So it's not new. It's somebody's done it before. I think the biggest leaps I've seen, and this is revolver, auto, whatever, is we are able to take people and train them to a level of proficiency in a much more compressed time than we used to be able to do.
And a lot of that, I think, has to do with understanding athletic performance and how to practice and how to train. And if you think about it, like, let's go back to Wild Bill Hickok, right?
Uh-huh.
He was the real, in my opinion, the real Wild West gunfighter. Like, it wasn't sucker punches and shootings; it was gunfights.
Yeah.
Right? And how much practice, apart from the actual incidents, was he able to truly get? Not a huge amount, because it was just logistically impossible back then. I'm sure he had a dry fire routine. I think he even talks about it in some of his writings, right? But look at the aficionado today. Not we talk about the three kinds of car owners, right? The guy that actually goes to the drag strip. That guy today has got an understanding of dry practice and the logistical ability to do a huge volume of live fire, comparatively speaking.
Yeah.
It's gotten to where people think they're not doing a huge volume unless they're doing, 30, 40,000 rounds a year. But that's unheard of before the last couple decades, the last 30 years or so,
And it seems like I read somewhere that Hickok, he carried 2 Colt Navies, 36 cal Navies. And, if you look at it, comparatively speaking to a modern centerfire, metallic cartridge, pretty close to 38 special. Yeah. Like pretty ballistically
I think
close.
He fired his old rounds every morning as practice, is what I read.
I've read versions where it says he would load them every day and practice. And then I've read a version where it said he would take one gun, go fire 6 rounds, reload it, and the next day he would shoot the other gun 6 rounds and reload it, where he had a constant cycle of So, but who knows? I mean, some of that's, but the bottom line is, if you look at that for the time, that was the guy shooting what we would, 12,000 plus rounds a year today,
Yeah.
Comparatively
Right.
speaking. So, he was obviously a very serious practitioner, whereas, most of and I would be hard pressed to think he probably wasn't casting his own round ball and,
Sure.
cooking his own black powder too. So who knows, but there again, he took it seriously enough to do that. And that was an outlier. And I think that sect of the training populace are still outliers today compared to.
Always been that way.
Yeah.
You see Musashi complain about that in the Book of Five Rings, right? It's
always
100%. It's always been that way. There's always a small percentage of even people that carry a weapon every day that actually care about anything more than baseline competence.
Yeah. And the biggest example of that, I took my wife, she likes to go to the range like 1 or 2 times a year and she's adopted like, hey, as long as I know where the 43C, the 22 loaded with 8 rounds are, she goes, I love shooting that gun, and she shoots it well. So it's like, why try to get her to fit into anything else? But the first time we went to the range, like 8 years ago, I lay out a Beretta 92, a Staccato, this. I'm like, just pick something. And she shot my Beretta 92 the best. But one of the most educated statements I've ever heard in gun world, she goes, I shoot that the best, but I know how to load, unload, and reload that Glock 19. So that's going to be my gun. And I'm like, are you sure? She goes, I shoot it well enough, but I know how to operate it. And there's too many levers and buttons on the Beretta. I get confused. I'm like, that's perfectly okay. And then when
that's a really smart statement, actually.
Yeah. But as we were walking out of the gun range, and I had her doing exercises on a 3x5 card and 2-inch dots, and we're walking down, and people had the blue Smurf B27s, and they have, shotgun patterns on them. And I said, this is the bulk of the gun owning populace, and this is the ones that practice, or this is the ones that practice.
I call that the grimace target.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's pretty staggering when you think about it. And I go, at least these people are trying. But she had, minimal amount of input from me, just some very baseline coaching, and was able to, reliably hit a 3x5 card at 3 yards. I'm like, you don't need to torture yourself any further. Let's just try to maintain that.
Yeah.
And then with, a 22 revolver, she's like, man, she can make hits on steel at 25 yards with that gun. It's like, and she shoots once or twice a year. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm fine. I got a Glock 19. I got that gun. We're good. But seeing how like the perception of just what I would call like the hobbyists that go to the gun range once a month and they have no baseline to tell how well they're doing or what they're even doing. And it's like, those people seem to be the most averse to going and actually taking a training course too. Whereas the people that don't train and have never held a gun, a lot of them seem to be hungry to get into training. And then the people that are at the top, the upper echelon, are constantly training. But that middle sect of the populace is probably the largest base of gun owners there is. Yeah.
I would say second largest. The largest is probably the guys that buy it, or the guys and gals that buy it, and it's the fire extinguisher.
Yeah.
They shoot it once, and that's it.
And that's kind of discounting like the hunting populace. There's a large populace of hunters in the U.S. That they own 3 guns. They own a handgun somebody gave them. They own a rifle they go to the deer blind with, and they own a shotgun because it's duck dynasty and duck season or whatever, right? And that's great too.
I'd be willing to argue they're probably better prepared than the ones that are shooting the grimace target.
Oh, 100%.
They've shot living things.
Oh yeah. And I find if you can bridge the gap, a guy that's a proficient shotgunner, and you can get him on the baseline of a handgun and like the principles of it, people that hunt tend to take to those things a little quicker. Just because, a 9mm handgun doesn't recoil like a 3.5-inch Magnum, tee shot for geese. So but again, like revolvers for normal earth people, like I see a lot of people like discourage it, and I would much rather somebody, because I'm a pretty hardline 2A dude. Like I would much rather see, a guy that can barely scrape together a living, that can afford an 856 Taurus, be told,
absolutely.
hey,
Yep.
pat on the
100%.
back, you're part of the team now, as opposed to, well, you shouldn't have bought that because that's going to, it's like,
and realistically, like someone who buys that can't afford to truly practice live fire,
probably
but gets a little dry fire routine together, can easily become skilled enough to outstrip the vast majority of the human race.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, I would completely concur.
I mean, they're not going to hang with Jerry Michalik or Caleb Giddings or you with the revolver, but they're certainly going to be better than, the meth head that comes into the house in the middle of the night.
Yeah, exactly. And that lends to, on the 2A thing, this is one of my arguments against concealed carry permits, is that excludes the most vulnerable of our entire populace from being able to carry a gun. So think about the, low income, maybe trying to raise a family on a convenience store paycheck, and you are going to make him go to the government and pay them money to have the privilege to carry a gun.
You shouldn't have to have a financial entry to exercising your rights.
Yeah, the bar to entry should be, I can afford a somewhat robust handgun, even if I got to make payments on it, right?
Like I said, the older I get, the more of a 2A absolutist I become. And if you look at history, throughout history, even in what we would consider relatively oppressive and stratified cultures, like say Europe in the Middle Ages, everybody had a weapon. Everybody had something. They might not have been able to afford a sword, but they had something.
A pitchfork worked nice. Yeah.
But I mean, I'm serious though. And if you don't have the ability to defend yourself, you are a victim or a subject.
Yep. And
so I'm with you.
And I really, one of the things, like I know you're working with Taurus now, and one of the things I used to kind of like stare down my nose at those guns. And then, I had a student bring a PT-92 to a class, and by the end of it, she's out shooting all the modern whiz-bang guns and has had like 0 issues with that gun. And I went, what'd you pay for that? Oh, I bought it for $200. Is all I could afford. I bought it for $250 at the local, used rack in the gun club, and I couldn't afford a Beretta. She's like, I can now, but I don't know enough. Like, I don't know if I want to make that investment.
So here's how Caleb got me, right?
Yeah.
I went and I did, the same thing you did with Chuck with the revolvers, but I did it with semi-autos, right? And when I was doing the stuff on the range, I was shooting one of their 1911s. I was like, this is actually, the trigger pull is heavy, but it's a factory gun. It's actually a pretty nice gun. Like the frame to slide fit is really nice. Like it shoots well. So Caleb just gives me two. So I cut them for optics and started shooting them. And I have shot those 1911s in a whole bunch of IDPA matches since. It's a 9mm 1911, and I have never had a malfunction.
Wow. That was unheard of 10 years
not,
ago.
Not one malfunction. And it's a $600 gun.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I put an optic on it and I did a trigger job on it, but I would do that. I'd do that to $1,000 gun. You know what I mean? That's just me. And that's all I did to it. You know, I mean, I coated it to make it come down, but you know, that's different. Put some fancy grips on it, you know, but that's just cosmetic. That's not mechanical.
Well,
it doesn't malfunction. It just runs.
Yeah. And their revolver lines, you know, that they've ebbed and flowed in, you know, either being problematic or, man, they've got a fantastic warranty now. And I bought an 856 Taurus, or, you know, Caleb called me. He's like, "Hey, do you want an 856?" And I go, "Yeah, but I'm going to go buy it." He's like, "Well, okay." I said, because I don't want to be beholden to like, well, I got this gun and I'll give it, because I said, I'm just going to go make my own investment. And I use that gun as a loaner gun in classes. And I did a little trigger cleanup on it, which was minuscule by comparison to some other things. And I let other people shoot it. And I think it's got probably pushing 2,000 rounds. I've never cleaned it. I was just like, let's kill it. Like, it's a $300 gun. Let's see if it dies. And it hasn't croaked. And I've gone to some states and some places that were maybe not the most gun friendly, where I'm like, do I really want to carry this 442 UC? That's like, or if I happen to, you know, get hemmed up and somebody takes that Taurus, I'll just go home and buy another one. Like, like it's not that big of a deal. And if TSA loses it, I go, oh well, report it stolen. See you later.
That is how Caleb got me to work for them. I was so impressed with those $600 guns.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't beat that. You just can't.
And like, I'll give you a funny example. And you talked about putting grips on a 1911. It's only been in the last about 15 years that we've started to have some modularity on striker fired semi-autos, with being able to tailor the grips to your, or the, you know, the grip angle, all the different things to your hand. And they've been doing that with revolvers since the like 1700s, like, or 1800s at least, right? With pistols that black powder guns. I mean, if you look at Wild Bill Hickok's guns and you look at another famous gunfighter's gun from the era, they've all got little, they sanded
little tweaks. Yeah.
Little tweaks. And, you know, we've done that with soldering irons and epoxies to, you know, to Glocks and stuff for a few years, but factory modularity hasn't been a thing for, you know, just until recently, you know, but this is a funny one. This is a 640-1. These guns they bring a premium now. Because it was it's a short run, and it's got Craig Spiegel like Bolivian rosewood stocks. I mean, like Craig, you can't even order from Craig anymore. He's finishing out his order list, and then he's retiring. And then here's the 650 CIA with some rubber stocks on it. The stocks on this gun cost more than this gun and 100 rounds of ammo. So which one am I going to go carry if I'm in a state where I don't know their concealed carry laws, but I'm an HR 218 guy. So let's say I'm running the risk of, if something happens, even if there's not a shot fired, I'm going to have to give that up. Is there an emotional attachment to that gun at all? No. Does it shoot as well as the other one? Yeah, pretty close. There's little minor ergo things on this gun or that gun that I like one's a little sexier, one's a little shinier, whatever. But functionally, they work exactly the same. So this one cost a fraction of what that gun's stocks do. So I got to get on an airplane and put that into baggage. Okay. I have no emotional investment in it. And I used to not be like that. And after meeting Caleb, I was like, oh, I totally get it now. I don't have to worry about my baggage under the belly of the plane or some, it getting dropped in TSA or they go to inspect it and it hits the concrete floor. I mean, if it chipped those stocks, these aren't made. I can't get these anymore.
They're irreplaceable.
They're irreplaceable to me. So it only makes sense for me to have, have a gun that I have, or have a couple of them that are functionally capable, reliable, digest the same ammo, use the same speed loaders, and I have no real hard financial investment or emotional attachment to them. So I think it's a win, and it sets a bar that the average wage American can afford to get a reliable revolver with.
The other thing that I really liked about Taurus that kind of got me on board, right? Because if you had asked me 2 years ago if I'd be working for Taurus, I would have been like, what? And nothing again, nothing negative, just
right.
it wasn't really on my radar, right? Is in an industry full of toxic culture, their corporate culture is healthy and supportive. And they're really they're working hard on making a better product every day. And you can't say that about everybody in this industry.
No. And did it happen to you on the factory tour?
Yeah.
Me too, man. I got a warm fuzzy when, I saw, average American, and probably just by the look of this fellow, he's probably never had two nickels to rub together, and I watch him build one of their entry level single actions, and he is excited to show me this is what I do. And I put it in this fixture and we do this, and then I check it here and then I do that. And he's so enthusiastic, and he's paid a good wage, and he does this job, and he does it with such a level of proficiency and pride that you rarely hear about one of those guns getting screwed up. And the way that they structure, okay, this operation, now we're going to train you on this one, and we're going to train, and it's a meritocracy where everybody is aspiring to be better. And I was really that one captured me. I was didn't expect that one, was out of left field. Didn't expect it. So.
Absolutely. Well, we have gone well over an hour. Why don't you tell everybody about American Fighting Revolver and what you guys do, what they can find on your website, kind of give that a little bit of love before we wrap up.
Yeah. So the website, it's a paywall website. We have an e-commerce where we sell pocket holsters, appendix holsters, for J-frames, LCRs. We're adding more SKUs of things that we're bringing in. But Daryl and I are very cautious about scale and not wanting to set on a whole bunch of product and things like that. And we don't put product on the website because somebody told us it was good. We actually wear test all that stuff, usually for 90 days to 6 months before we even make a deal that, hey, we're going to buy that in and carry it on the website. So, and then the paywall portion, because of a lot of the big tech suppression on Patreon and some of the others with gun related content, we keep the video content and some of the articles behind the paywall. And what it's done is we have this huge community of revolver enthusiasts, from about age 23 to, I think the oldest one's 88 now. And there's no negativity. There's no sniping in the comments. There's no, it's just a really positive, little niche community, and it grows a little bit every month. And we charge $5 a month, and we do these deep dives and on Smith, Ruger, Taurus, Colt, to really keep some of the education, some of the legacy and history alive. And, we talk about grips, Daryl writes articles on ammunition, things like that. I do maintenance Mondays. I usually do about every 90 days. I'll do like a 1 month block of maintenance Monday, and that's 2 cameras, and I'm tearing a revolver apart. And it's like, hey guys, this ain't that hard. I can walk you through it. And if you're a subscriber and you reach out to me and go, oh dude, I'm stuck, I'll FaceTime you and walk you through getting your revolver together. But we wanted to put that paywall there to make a little bar for people to jump over to really want to be involved in that. And one of the other things I do, we get new products. The subscribers, they get the email list first. Like, hey, if you're you got to log in to actually buy this product from us, because we want the people that support us to get the gear first. We run training. We don't do as many training gigs, but we have Revolver Roundup on the West Coast, the Pat Rogers Memorial Revolver Roundup, to kind of honor Pat's legacy, and bring in a lot of LE people and things like that to, talk about, like, train people how cops and, undercover cops and all that. And we bring in some dudes that people have never heard of, that have done things that people will never read about, to and give them access to those guys. And that's at Gunsight every November. And we launched our own event on the East Coast. And this year it's going to be called Revolver Fest. And we'll have 8 or 9 trainers out there. And it's, dance with the one you brought. If you got a rimfire pocket gun, we don't care. And we will have a demo day on the Friday to kick it off, where I've got Taurus, Colt, Ruger, Smith & Wesson, Lipsies, and then Diamondback, which is a newer Florida-based company. They're building revolvers stateside. We're going to have those set up to where you can come and shoot the guns. Lipsies will have their exclusive guns out there, and come in and like mini SHOT Show demo day. So, and then, if you're a student, it's included in the price. If you're not, it's $25. That helps us offset the facility fee, and you can come out, and if you like one of the guns, one of the Lipsies that we work with quite a bit, they're like, hey, we'll send a pallet of guns to the pro shop, and then, if somebody likes one, they can just go up and buy it there. And then whatever we don't sell, we'll just put it on a freighter back, So we're trying to make it accessible to like normal earth people. And so that's kind of the crux of all of it. We've got the historical side, and then we do industry consulting. So, we've worked with Taurus and Smith & Wesson and Colt. Haven't worked with Ruger directly, but we've worked with them through Lipsies, and we kind of do all that through Lipsies Wholesaler. If you're an FFL dealer and you're listening to the podcast, you need to be a Lipsies dealer. They are a fantastic company to work with, work around, work for. They're great. We've been my dad's FFL. We've been a Lipsies dealer for 25 years, and they're, you pick up the phone, a human being answers it. It's really cool. You don't have to press 1 to get to the operator or the sales. It's great company.
So where can people find you on the interwebs?
So we're at AmericanFightingRevolver.com. We're at AFR Official on Instagram, Facebook. You can American Fighting Revolver. You can query that. We have a YouTube channel. If you type American Fighting Revolver, it'll come up. Our YouTube name is AF Revolver 357, which was the only one available. We do some free public content there, mainly when we're working with a company like a Taurus or somebody to, they're wanting to launch a new gun, or they've sent us a sample. We'll put that out for free, either on the website or on YouTube. So multifaceted.
Very cool. Well, everybody, if you're into revolvers, or if they're part of your kind of firearms spectrum, right? Check these guys out. He and Daryl both are definitely SMEs in the field, and definitely worth looking into for sure. Hope everybody enjoyed the episode, and I will talk to everybody next time.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Way is in Training. Please come back again as we explore how training makes us better at our craft and better in our everyday lives. See all of you soon.